Oil Pipeline Deregulation Report, U.S. Department of Justice, May 1986. Introduction. Report examined the state of the competition for the federally regulated oil piping industry with the continued of the United States with the venue of the Department of Justice, typically with the regulation necessary for some, but not all interstate oil pipelines commencing accommodating on a recent proposal of the regulated industry, but the Department has stated that the only do with the pipeline regulation which to ensure the economic efficiency should continue to be regulated. Regulation should be retained only wherever the benefits outweigh the cost. Two, with the continued regulation of any of the pipeline warranted only for the significant market power if the deregulated is likely to impose social cost excess of the regulatory costs, since only then can regulation confer with the benefit of the report outlines the methodology assessing the needs. Continued federal regulation of oil pipelines resolve with obtained with applying methodology oil pipeline market data and conclude with the recommended with the elimination of federal regulations of all existing crude oil pipelines. Substantial matter of the oil product pipelines with the report we conclude with the five product pipelines should remain with the subject of the federal regulation. Six of the other product pipelines remain too close to call, but at the time nothing in this report anticipates elimination tariff regulation currently extra with the individual state of the reports undertaken with a commitment to the Congress to the Department to conduct the study with the identify with the interstate oil pipelines should remain federally regulated. 3 in May 1984 with the Department will leave with the preliminary report with the competition with the oil pipeline industry with the preliminary report outlined with the methodology with the Department proposed with identify with the candidate pipelines for continued regulation. The preliminary report was presented with the data with the Department proposed with the analysis on July 16, 1984 with the Department placed notice in Federal Register soliciting comments for the methodology in its database. In mid-October 1984, the Department retrieved the public comment was of a preliminary report. Interested part of the predominantly oil pipeline industry, the more frequent industry, the comments of the methodology report are validated with the BEA economic area, preliminary geographical markets, and the use of the route capacity of the rather than on-take off-case capacity of the thresholds of the value of the 2500. While in some cases the industrial comments methodologies were valid, they did not provide arguments that the Department not already anticipated with the preliminary report. Addition with a few notable exemptions with such as the submission Sun and Buckeye with the industry that did not provide helpful comment regarding with the Department database. Chapter 2 discover the economic principles underlying with the Department to discover the economic welfare criteria with the view of the Department to evaluate pipeline deregulation and explain pipeline regulation sometimes enhance economic welfare. Chapter 3 report discover the methodology of the Department used to analyze completion of the pipeline market to examine the need of the continue with the regulation individual pipelines. So this is primary criteria and use for the initial with the indicated market concentration. This discusses various factors indicated by the absence of significant market power despite with a high degree of market concentration. Finally, Chapter 3 explained that the regulation not always effective with restraining the exercise of such market power over the pipeline does have the deregulation is justified when effective with the regulation is impossible. The Chapter 4 will discuss the issue of the proper unit over the regulation of the Department to maintain with appropriate union with a fully interconnected pipeline system owned by same person with that pipeline company, not individual pipeline market. Chapter 5 will discuss the data of the Department to analyze the need of the regulation individual pipelines. Chapter 6 contains the deregulation analyzing existing pipelines of the President with the Department recommendations. First exists discuss the five product pipeline recommended to continue federal regulation. Second is discuss with the six product pipelines and not recommendations of the being made at this time. Finally, to discuss some of the pipelines recommended for the deregulation lines. All of the three categories look with the discussion because preliminary structural screening indicate with more detailed investigation warranted at this time the Department does not make recommendations with respect to the liquefied petroleum gas, natural gas, liquid, and hydrous ammonia pipelines. These pipelines are not analyzed in this report. Chapter 7 recommends newly built crude oil pipelines not subject to the federal regulation, explains whether the regulation is not needed to prevent economically inefficient behavior of the new product oil pipeline. Chapter 7 explains that there are strong justifications not regulating new products pipeline as well. 2. Economic principle. The underlying report, important characteristics of oil pipeline. There are two types of oil pipeline: crude oil pipelines and petroleum product pipelines. Crude oil pipelines transport crude oil producing fields or port terminals to the oil refineries. Petroleum product pipelines transport certain petroleum products, motor gas, jet fuel, gasoline, diesel fuel, distillated heating oil, and from oil refineries or port terminals to product terminals located throughout the country. Several characteristics of oil pipelines must take into account with the containerization deregulation. First, pipelines are high efficient means for the transportation movement of large volumes, either the crude oil or the petroleum products over the long distance. Per unit cost of transportation pipelines is lower than truck or rail. Only water transportation can complete pipelines over a long distance. and water transportation is unavailable location over the hence of the competition over the transportation mode with the not necessarily produce of the competitive result of the petroleum market actual potential impairment or module competition must therefore be examined on a market by market basis. Second, oil pipeline exhibited significant economy scales. Average cost per barrel throughout with the throughput over the construction operating pipeline declined with a significantly with the pipeline through with the increase of the per mile cost of construction. Pipeline varies roughly with a circumference of the equal to 3 the pi times the radius or the capacity of the pipeline varies with the roughly through the area of the cross section equal times pi times the square of the radius. Pipeline radius increase with its construction cost rise roughly in the same proportion with the capacity rise over the proportion square of the radius, and with the addition of the average per barrel the operation cost of the pipeline any of the given demand interval will increase throughout power throughput over the significant range. The decline in petroleum consumption since 1978 suggests that existing pipelines typically may be operating throughput level with the range, therefore, that may exhibit the economic scale of the current throughput level to the economy scale implied with the pipeline usually with the can transport any given volume with between 2 points with a significant lower loss cost than two smaller ones. Economy scale generally very difficult with a new pipeline into competition existing pipeline and the origin destination market. The new pipeline designated transport a substantial smaller volume and the existing pipeline would suffer with a substantial cost of disadvantage per unit transfer with a larger scale entry necessary to eliminate, but the cost disadvantage would not, in most cases, with appealing with the potential entrance of the absent substantial growth in demand. Large-scale entry with the presence of the economics of the scale would create substantial excess of the capacity, raising average cost would depress with the market price, or do both, making entry unprofitable. Entry into the market occupied single pipeline infeasible only if the growth of demand provides room for a second efficient-sized pipeline. Past growth in demand would have been reasonable for the multiple pipelines serving the sum of the markets, but unlikely to be an important force of the fact in the future. The scale economies alone suggest that entry of new pipelines cannot be relied upon to deconcentrate particular markets. Check for the exercise of the market power. Third, oil pipelines are immobile. Once in place, pipeline cannot be justly readily in shifting sources of the supply changing markets. 11, thus sort of hit and run entry with the rival suppliers may be possible in the industry, but it's not possible the pipeline industry. Hit and run entry is impossible. The mere threat of the rival entry may leave the market unperformed competitively, even if there are very few actual sellers in the market at one time. Because of the hit and run entry pipeline is unrealistic competitive performance is concentrated petroleum transportation market served only by pipelines unlikely, and these market deregulation would likely have adversely affect the competitive performance. On the other hand, deregulation pipeline concentrated petroleum markets may be justified if competing water transportation expands as a constant unit cost. If in this case an effort to elevate the price of the transportation will be checked by ability of the shippers to switch to water transportation. B. Pipeline market power. The oil pipelines of the other industry market power arises with the ability to control supply with the demand of the relevant market pipeline. If the monopoly of the market power with the upstream market with originated the shipment of the origin market with the monopoly market power to downstream of the market which delivers the destination market, or both the deregulated pipeline monopoly with the market power with the downstream and increase of the transportation chain with the restricted supply codes with the crude oil with the downstream with the drive with the up price of the relevant to the downstream market. Similarly, with the deregulated pipeline monopoly market power upstream, and there will be positional profitable to restrict access for the ship of the product for the crude oil upstream. Some of the supply with generally would be willing to supply with a lesser quantity of the products and crude oil demand with a lower price. Again, this pipeline would increase the transportation charge, in this case, for the capture of the upstream profits for the crude oil producers or refiners. A deregulated pipeline may exercise power over the markets of any of the three type structure. For the first of the pipeline only supply with the petroleum in the particular destination of the market, and if it is generally held that there are no good substitute for the petroleum in the pipeline would be monopolists. Monopolists of the pipeline would be free with the restrict with the output with the increase of the price to minimize with the profits and resulting petroleum price could significantly exceed with the current level of second of the pipeline. We're not with a monopolist, but nevertheless of the dominant supplier of the petroleum of the market. The result could be similar with the less of the rear. If the pipelines are friendly with the market of the transportation supplier would be unable to expand their output with the capacity of the current market rate for the deregulated dominant pipeline with the act of the monopolist restrict with a portion of the market with the friends of the other similar other firms could not economically supply. There would only be the few large supply of the particular destination market with the likely with the deregulated pipeline pipeline would charge higher price for the transport of smaller quantity for the as present, either because of the fewer supply of colluded with the raise of the price, or because each of the recognize that it unilaterally raises prices. See economic welfare criterion. Extra of the pipeline market price for the alternative of the relief, the efficiency effect for the distributed to effect for the sole for the creation, which of the department will evaluate for the oil pipeline deregulation, and this report with the efficiency effect for the excessive pipeline tariffs of the misallocation of the resource for the insufficient reduction of the petroleum market, petroleum product consumption of the crude oil production of the refining utilization, insufficient of the representative of the loss of economic welfare to the society. Excessive pipeline tariffs also have the distributive effect that however if the generated transfer of the income oil producer refined with the and or consumer the stockholders of the pipeline company, for example, the subsidy City A supplied with a refined petroleum product from refinery City B, and there was two means of the transportation currently being either the transport product between B to A product pipeline with a fixed capacity of the water route with a accommodating competitive water transportation. With the water transportation can easily expand with a constant unit cost on the regulated pipeline tariff. If below the competitive water tariff with the deregulated with the pipeline will allow the raise of the tariff with no higher than the price of the water transport, the tariff increase with no alter with the amount of the product being with the transfer of the pipeline amount with the transfer by water, or the final price of the product of the City A with the deregulation does not include the instance of the economic welfare of the society could cover the redistribution income of the individuals, firms of the right to ship the pipeline regulated rate the stockholders of the pipeline. Department analysis pipeline deregulation does not consider the purely distributive effect of the report evaluates water welfare of effects of the pipeline deregulation reference competitive with the threshold below the free market over the presumed set tariffs more efficiently more than does the regulation market with the concentration rate of the HHI index or Hereford the Hirschman index, we'll just call it Hirschman index, is above the threshold. The department will believe the unregulated market forces can be relied on to predict the competitive result of the current regulatory alternative to unregulated market determination over the price quite fluid with the progress of the continuing tour of the more efficient cost over the regulatory methodology. Therefore, the department recommendation for the pipeline deregulation have developed in the assumption of the regulatory alternative which will become more efficient than that has been in the past. 3. Assessing the degree of the pipeline market power with the rationale of the pipeline regulation. In order to accept the degree of the particular pipeline process that possesses the market power with the necessary first for the definement of the relative origin of the destination market to examine the structure of the competition and then on the basis of the principle of the department of delineation market boundary, both product and geographic set forth in the detail of the merger guidelines. For the applying with these principles, the oil pipeline relevant market of the delineated and considered with respect to each of the series of the group of the product of the geographic area with the increasing side of the significant price increase for the profitable with the high hypothetical with the monopolist for the product in the area with a small group of the product with a geographical area and with a significant price increase for the profitable and relevant market. A. The competitive of the relevant market. There are 4 types of the relevant market: of the crude destination market, of the crude origin market, of the project destination market, the product origin market. Of the crude oil delivered pipeline complete with all of the crude oil into the destination of the regardless of the web of the imported into the area of the produced locally. Competitors crude destination market will therefore include both of the pipeline water transportation facility for the imported crude as well as any of the local crude production facility for the crude oil with any of the air exported with the area consumed with the refining area with the pipeline was transporting the crude oil out of the area, therefore competes with the local crude refinery as well as the other crude transportation facilities with the pipeline water facilities. Just as local crude production and source for the competition with the crude destination markets, local product production, refining and source completion with the product of the destination market with the competitive of the production destination market with include the pipeline water transportation facilities that import petroleum products plus local refineries that produce the petroleum products local consumption. Alternative of the outbound with the transportation production origin of the crude origin market, the product origin market of the relevant consumer markets of the end user of the competitive of the product of the original market include the pipeline water transportation facility for the export of the petroleum product plus local to distribute the petroleum product for the only transportation mode that can completely pipeline long distance shipping and water transportation rail with the truck transportation significantly less efficient than pipeline barges tanker with the transportation petroleum over long distances. The market analyzed with this report sufficiently large the distance therefore the required interior market shipment of the station along with the railroads and the trucks will not handle a significant proportion of the market value. Stated differently, with the most shipments of either the railroad and trucks intra-market shipments will have already been transported to inter-market by the pipeline and water transportation which are locally produced and with the consume of the rail and truck facilities are excluded with the analysis of the relevant competitors. Crude crude pipelines participate in the crude oil of the destination market, with the product pipelines participate with the product origin of the destination market. The excess of the pipeline market power over the result of the production of the crude production of the crude oil market, with the production of the refinery utilization crude destination product origin market, and the production of petroleum consumption in the product destination market. With the crude pipeline market power is crude destination market that must also be filled with the product market. Supposed monopoly crude pipeline supplies with the refinery sector with the complete its local of the market with the numerous product pipeline. When the crude pipeline is deregulated, may be able to force a socially inefficient reduction of the refinery output of the local market. And if the market were the numerous competing product pipelines, however, the reduction of the refinery output did not raise the product prices. However, the deregulated crude pipeline will be exercised market power with the crude destination market will not affect the price of the local production destination markets. If, however, there were no pipelines, water facilities with completing the importation over the product when the crude pipelines, the market power would extend to product the destination market, the result of the higher market price for the petroleum product with a similar fashion with the petroleum product market power of the production origin market, but may not extend with the crude oil origin markets. Because of the report addressed for the competition faced over the oil pipeline, the competition transportation petroleum generally considered those of the petroleum-based commodities that can be transported via the petroleum pipelines. Addition crude oil that consists of the gasoline, jet oil, kerosene, diesel fuel, distillated heating oil, residual fuel, coke, and asphalt with the pipeline products. This report does not attempt to account for the competitive limitations of the oil pipeline market power due to competition in the short run from the alternative fuels for the natural gas, liquid petroleum gas, of the pipeline transportation community with the natural liquid gas, liquid petroleum gas, and ammonia. None of the report attempts to account for the potential of the competition and if any with the possible entry with a new pipeline for the refineries, and in respect for the report there may therefore tend to underestimate the competitiveness of the transportation markets and in the pipeline compete. Geological scope of the market with the starting point for the relevant market analysis report with the 181 economic area of the BEA, which is the Bureau of Economic Analysis of the U.S. Department of Commerce, with the divided continuous United States with the Bureau of the Economic Analysis, or instead with the Department of Commerce for the representative of the actual area of the economic activity. The Bureau of Economic Analysis has its center and majority and in its center a major city, which is the traditional hub of the economic activity for the entire Bureau of Economic Analysis. For the purpose of the Bureau of Economic Analysis, for the base of the organizing data of the pipeline or the competing facility with the competing concentration indexes extent of the Bureau of Economic Analysis are roughly approximations of the market. The resulting concentration indexes of the rough and indicative of the market concentration, one of the several criteria of the value of the need with the continue with the regulation map shown with the current delineation Bureau of Economic Analysis set out with adjacent with the page. Bureau of Economic Analysis reasonably approximate the geographic scope of the pipeline markets because of the approximate maximum area with the viable serve with the high competitive of the trucking sector with the average over the area with the Bureau of Economic Analysis with the contingency state with the 16,376 square mile with equivalent to with a circle with a radius of 72 miles with a square with a side length with equal to 128 miles. Most petroleum tank trucks are within a 50-mile radius of their origin. In addition, with the beginning with a suitable size of the Bureau of Economic Analysis are centered around major cities, both with the consumption of oil products, the refining capacity with the concentrate of the metropolitan area. With indeed almost all of the refining centers are identified in one oil pipeline studied area, located either on very near the city of the Bureau of Economic Analysis and the Bureau of Economic Analysis view of the reasonable approximation of the crude destination, product origin, and product destination markers. And it shows a picture of the Bureau of Economic areas. To the extent of the crude oil production and not concentrated with the metropolitan area of the head of the Bureau of Economic Analysis, less use for the approximation crude oil origin markets. In conducting the pipeline-to-pipeline analysis of the Bureau of Economic Analysis, proved it not suitable market of the where of the crude oil origin and the other than three type of the market of the Department of the redefined of the market to the core of the better economic reality. The HHS indexed international criteria of the market power after the competitors of each of the relevant markers have been identified. The Department begins a quantitative analysis of the market power with examining the number and relative of the size of the competitor of the assignment of each of the market share of the construction of the index and market with the concentration index of the market concentration used for the report and the HHI index of the Hirschman HHI index measure for the Department of Merger Guidelines in order to determine whether the challenge of the merger under Section 7 of the Clayton Act. The HHI is calculated with sum of the squared individual market share of all of the firms included with the market with unlike a simple four-firm concentration ratio. The HHI index index reflects both of the distribution of the market share of the top four firms of the composition market outside of the top four firms. One is saying market share of the calculating of the HHI's index of the two factors complicated with the assignment of the pipeline market with share of the first joint with the venture very common in the oil of the pipeline industry, while each owner of the joint venture could be assigned with the market share of the base and with the ownership of the joint venture that would generally be the appropriate would particularly be the enact with the chaos of the staff of the company joint ventures in which the pipeline acts as a single entity with the entity under the joint direction with its power with the undivided joint interest of the pipeline differ with the staff of the company joint venture within the form to do not have a separate corporate identity. Instead, that each owner set its own tariff with the undivided joint interest pipelines have then linked to the bundle of straws, which each own treating its own share with a separate pipeline. Undivided joint interest pipelines have the potential for the greater competition than a stock company joint venture. However, a number of reasons for the potential may be limited the capacity of the decision for the undivided joint interest pipelines are usually made jointly, and the operating rules are undivided joint interest pipelines may explicitly restrict the competition among its owners. Most of the importantly, undivided joint interest pipelines have certain unavoidable characteristics, such as common operating company information exchange with the tendency to restrict the competition among the joint venture for the generally inappropriate. This is generally inappropriate to assign each owner of the joint venture pipeline a market share of the base and with the ownership of the fair share of the pipeline. Second, complicating factor is the owners of the particular pipelines may own other than competing facility operating in the same market with the competing facility other than pipeline refineries crude production. The example of two nominal separate company, the X pipeline company and the X refinery company may be in the same market, but if they both wholly owned by the X oil corporation, then the co-ownership makes competition between them very unlikely. In the face of such overlap, the affiliation devising reasonable measure of the marketing concentration is not an easy task. At one extreme of the department could have the aggravated everything that is all joint ventures, and even X pipeline company and X refining company could be true with an independent entity of such treatment that would seriously underestimate the effects of the ownership overlaps on competition. However, the other extreme of the department that could be aggravated at every turn of something with the market share of the independent companies all of the markets have with the joint ownership and interest of the market approach would be err with the opposite direction, serious overestimating anti-competitive effects such as overlaps and analyzing actual markets. The department has dealt with these problems by assigning market shares according to the following rules. Rule 1. Parents who own subsidiaries and corporations under common control are treated as one company. Pipeline is wholly owned by a single company. The market share of the pipeline is attributed to that company. 3. If more than 50% of the joint venture pipeline, however, the organized owned by a single joint venture of the pipeline is attributed to the joint venture. 4. If no joint venture owns more than 50% of the pipeline, however, it's organized the pipeline is treated as a single independent competitor, regardless of whether its ownership is owning competing facilities in the market. Thus, if the X Oil Corporation is wholly owned with a subsidiary and more than 50% of the inbound product of the pipeline, A with the term with the 10% of the market, with the 2 with the refining, with the 15% of the market, X market shares, considering to be 25% on the other hand, neither the X nor any other company, direct or indirect, owns more than 50% of the pipeline. The X share will be 15% of the A is 10%. The HHI index calculated with a U with a way of squaring with the sum of the market share of the individual firm with the Rule 3 implicitates assumed with the majority of the interest of the pipeline conferred with the owners control over all of the pipeline capacity that tends to the overstate with the level of concentration of the market. On the other hand, Rule 4 implicit assumes that the joint venture pipeline that is not controlled by a single owner behave with a total independent entity with such with appropriate implicit assumed that the joint venture of the parents let them make through a put with the decision if they have no other interest in the market under state. It's the true concentration of the 3 general exemptions in doing the market, but also the department assigned all of the facilities of the market individual firms. 3 exemptions of the local crude production and local products consumption, water transportation firms specifically dealt with the local crude production, local product consumption, or the marketing, water transportation not publicly available. Furthermore, local crude production, product marketing, with the water transportation, with the competitive activities on calculating market share of the 3 type of the facilities include with the denominator, but their own market share is squared and otherwise are not added to the HHI index. To illustrate some of the crude destination market consists of local crude production of 1,000 barrels per day. A pipeline of the firm brings over the 300,000 barrels a day of the pipeline firm B brings 400,000 barrels a day, and waterborne facilities collectively bring 2,000 barrels a day. Market universe of the 100,000 barrels, firm A shares 30% of the firm B 40%. Collective share of the local crude production is 10% of the collective share of the water transportation is 20%. The HHI index calculation is employed with the result of the squared market share of the A and B result of the HHI index of 2,500. The method may base for the HHI index downward of the base is likely to quite small the local crude production, water-based transportation product, marketing competitive activities. HHI index threshold of the municipal designated pipeline marketing power of the merge takes place for the banking between the competing firms with the reasonable antitrust policy which require with the increased likelihood of the anti-competitive behavior against for the efficiency presumed to the company of the merger of the Department of Merger guidelines established for the HHI XN threshold relating to the balance of the post-merger HHI index below 1,000. Competitive concern for the presumed efficiency light that are outweighed by the efficiency of the post-merger of the HIX exceeds 1,800 competitive concerns are presumed substantial, although still more outweighed in efficiency when the continued regulation industry rather than the merger is issued. However, the benefits preventing anti-competitive behavior, which regulation presumes the must be weighed with against the direct and indirect cost of the regulation as a matter of the practical implementation through, though even the direct costs of the regulation are difficult to measure, they include the research of the public and private committed with the determination, implementation, maintenance of the tariffs and the correct costs, forms of resource misallocations are much of the more difficult to approve in the face of the impossibility of the actual of the measuring the cost of the regulation. The department believe that HHI index of 2,500 is a reasonable threshold above the pipeline should be presumed to require for the continue with the regulation applying with the principle of the underlying tab of the HHI index and the Bureau of Economic Analysis is less than or equal to 2,500 of the competitive concern for the Bureau of Economic Analysis presume is small relative to the cost of the pipeline regulation. Thus, if four equal-sized pipelines serve the same market, such as the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the HHI index of 2,500, they would be deregulated based on the HHI threshold criteria with the HHI volume. Particularly, the Bureau of Economic Analysis is greater than 2,500. However, the Bureau of Economic Analysis tentatively concerned with the high risk of all the pipelines served with the Bureau of Economic Analysis. It's important to know that the high risk designation does not necessarily compel with the recommendation continued regulation of the additional criteria of the evaluated need for the continued regulation. Imputing the HHI index, in particular Bureau of Economic Analysis, is appropriate to take into account the extent of the surplus capacity with the department defined with the pipeline capacity with the Bureau of Economic Analysis pipeline entire with the throughout capacity without regard to on-take with the off-take with the Bureau of Economic Analysis market with the surplus capacity with the pipeline through output capacity with the pipeline with the market see with the total pipeline on-take or off-take and in that with the market with, for example, the measured capacity with the Colonial pipeline with the Greensboro, North Carolina, and the Colonial's New York bound and main truck line capacity with the 1908 with the BMD's barrels a day with gross Greenboro's local production consumption of 3% of the figure with according to the substantial surplus over the capacity of the Greensboro market. With the contrary, with the data of the competitive fringe of the we're able to supply with the entire Greensboro to demand with the HHI index based largely with the Colonial's throughput with capacity would indicate that the Colonial has a significant market power with the Greensboro, whereas in fact it would have no surplus capacity that commonly encountered in the analysis through the market with the illustrated with the Colonial example surplus. Capacity can be based on the HHI index upward. The department countered with the attributing with the surplus capacity of the larger firm of the market with the design with the throughput with the equal with the illustrated with the product with the destination party with the following example the market with the product with the consumption at 20,000 barrels a day with the market with the serve with the four independent pipelines A, B, C, and D with the capacity with the 20, 15, and 10 and 2 MBDs respectively done adjusted with an index of 3,305 with the HHI index adjusted for the actual throughput with a minimize each of the pipeline had a 25% share of the market consumption yield through the HHI index to 2,500 with the pipeline D with the constraint with the capacity with the 2,000 barrels of the day, which only at 10% of the market consumption comes accounting for the constraint with the throughput with the HHI with the minimize with the sign with the 2 MBDs at 10% with the share of the pipeline D, splitting with the remaining of the 18 MBDs equal with among the A, B, and C companies with attributed through the 6 MBDs as throughput share of the 30% to each of them, with the result of the HHI existing surplus capacity with the 2,800 compared with the adjusted with the HHI of 3,305. We go with the produce minimize with the throughout the HHI next understate of the market power, and in some case, the additional blind adherence of the procedure may sometimes be produced in an appropriate result with a general, however, the reasonable procedure for the move upward by for the HHI permits for the estimating pipeline market power with the particular markets given in with the total thought with the capacity with the market often exceed with the total pipeline on take off take with this market. Other criteria is set for the justification of pipeline regulation. HHI value that does not necessarily indicate with the market, nor does the make market power with the necessarily indicate with the desirability of the regulation. There are a number of the reasons of the particular origin of the destination. Bureau economic analysis HHI above 2,500 should not be considered a high risk for someone that all of the pipeline serve with the Bureau economic analysis. In some cases, one or more of the pipeline Bureau economic analysis may not have sufficient market power with the warrant regulation. Otherwise, pipeline may have sufficient market power with the current industry structure. It's such that the regulation may not be effective with it as well and have any welfare and enhancing effect. The section discusses the factor would take within the appropriate designation Bureau economic analysis of the HHI index above 2,500 with a high risk market with one or more of these factors present with the department to consider the Bureau economic analysis non-high risk with at least some of the pipelines served with the Bureau economic analysis with a large proportion of the both of the on-take off-take with a particular pipeline occurred with the origin of the destination. Bureau economic analysis designated with a non-high risk with the pipeline with either before or after with a high risk. Before the factors have been considered with the pipeline will be considered the candidate with a proper deregulation. The factors that indicate with the insufficient market power, close proximity to Bureau economic analysis facilitated in other Bureau economic analysis can sometimes indicate that the pipeline lacks the market power in spite of the high of the HHI value index. The department value of the Bureau economic reasonably indicate initial with approximation to the market with explain with above with the truck for the transportation Bureau economic analysis, economic feasible in some cases, major capacity with the country of the Bureau economic analysis near facility and another Bureau economic analysis with it may be the appropriate to add the the market, which make result of just for the HHI below the 2,500 MBD for threshold. Reasonable appraisal of the likelihood of the anti-competitive to be for the unregulated pipeline market. It all should be into the consideration present of any regulated pipeline, even in a highly concentrated market. One regulated pipeline sufficient capacity to serve all significant portions of the market will consecutively prevent any of the regulated pipelines from the raising of the tariff allowed with the regulated pipeline markets where the regulation could be maintained with one or more pipelines combined with the capacity of the large relative of the market with the regulation of the remaining pipeline unnecessarily cover the regulated pipeline tariff to provide efficient tariff ceiling for all other firms on the market. In situation with the HHI index calculated with the market with all the pipelines assumed with the unregulated would overestimate with the likelihood of the anti-competitive effect with the normally associated with the deregulation HHI index of the market characterized with the present regulated pipeline significantly excessive with the capacity of the adjusted with the assessing the capacity of the regulated pipeline, hypothetically large group of the firms competitively produce prevailing regulated tariff rate with the appropriate adjustment with the implementicity that may been made with the analysis individual pipeline, insignificant market share of the particular venue. Bureau economic analysis should not be considered the high risk market of the pipeline, notwithstanding with a high HHI index for the market of the pipeline, small share of the market consists of either non-compliance either non-pipeline facilities which are unaffected with the pipeline regulation or the pipeline will continue with the regulated with the small pipeline does not raise serious competitive concerns, but it would not be able to exercise market power. Well, data on the capacity of the pipelines available to the department, preparing with a report with the comparable data with the capacity of the water traffic or not, therefore with the data with the actual water shipment of the Bureau economic analysis in 1980 with the likelihood of the water traffic can be easily expanded above the 1980 throughout with the levels in some of the market expansions may be more likely the case of the coast over the ports, however, the sense of the inland waterways, particularly subject to the condition of the ice and flood and lower water congestion. If the water traffic appears to be currently a viable source of the competition from the water traffic can be easily and efficiently expanded with the 1980 level to respond with attempt with the extra of the pipeline market with the department adjust for the HHI with downward. However, the indicated regulation may affect with an ineffect with a certain type of the vertical the arrangements may be the undercover the rational with the pipeline regulations. These arrangements include vertical integration with the market power with the otherwise vertical supply chain, certainly with the supply with the contracts bilateral exchange. In each of the discover the greater detail with below, but in some cases the arrangements remove the possibility that the market power can be exercised. In others, case with the vertical arrangement that do not preclude with the exercise of the market with the column and the question with the pipeline regulation effectively address the problem thus having any welfare enhancing effect with in general with the vertical arrangement over the more common to become with the crude oil pipelines within their ship, the opposed with the relations between the product and pipelines and their ship, the helm with the crude oil pipelines over the class 10 with the pros, less need to continue with the regulation of the due with the pipelines, vertical integration pipeline with adjacent stage with the substantial with the mitigate with the concern with the exploitation with the market power with the concern with the example of the monopoly crude oil pipeline vertically integrated with the refining with the higher tariffs of the pipeline with reflect with the higher input with the price for the refinery, while the pipeline refinery with the common owner, however, the cost of the combined facility with the actual cost of the transportation with the crude on with the pipeline normal tariff for the relevant. Same effects may be defined with the new refinery with the integrated with the joint venture pipelines owner with the face for the true marginal cost of the ownership share of the pipeline correspond with the share of the pipeline throughout the refinery. Currently, refinery owners have a strong incentive to avoid facing the tariff of the level of the incess of the marginal transportation cost of the widespread over the currents of vertical integrated pipeline strongly suggest that the vertical integration more effectively means for the assuming the marginal cost pricing with the reliance of the regulation. Vertical integration between the refinery owners of the joint venture over the pipeline provide with effective means for the preventing opportunistic behavior ineffective with the regulated pipelines possessing market power. Such arrangements also permit a vision effective regulation under which pipeline tariffs are set up at the competitive level by reducing pipeline throughout the price of the refined output with the increase of the monopoly levels. This result can be achieved by either style with the company joined with the venture with the or undivided with an interest joint venture for the pipeline, although with the case of the undivided interest joint venture with a conspiracy would be required in order to achieve the monopoly output with the joint venture pipeline tariff with the merely allocates the monopoly profit between the pipeline stage and the refinery stage of the integrated operation. Thus, the regulation does not have any welfare and enhancing effect in the ultimate production destination market. If the joint venture pipeline also have the market power in the crude origin market, the regulation would have the only welfare enhancing effect for the ease of the refinery of the downstream end of the pipeline could be extra with the monopoly power of the crude oil market by restricting and through the capacity of the pipeline once with the relevant regulation simply train for the profits of the pipeline stage of the refinery stage of the bottlenecks elsewhere of the vertical supply chain. It may also significantly weaken effectively in the case of the continued oil pipe regulation with examples of over the product destination market X is served only with the two equal side with the inbound product lines alpha and beta. For suppose with the A competitive refinery market the alpha that origins A with the wild monopoly refinery operates beta origin B and alpha and beta with the only pipelines out of A and B respectively. The deregulated alpha that poses a strong risk with a higher product price for the excellence mode. Moving the monopoly price would require the agreement between two parties of the pipeline alpha and either the pipeline beta with the refinery at B. It would be not necessary to obtain an agreement between the refinery at B and all refineries at A. Thus, the production density of the market X should be considered the high-risk pipeline with the alpha the less justification for regulation of the pipeline beta B. Pipeline beta. The extent of the monopoly refinery at B exercise of the market power of the regulation of the beta will have no beneficial effect of the monopoly refinery B if service of the refinery bottleneck of the renders regulation of the beta with the ineffective of the relevant price of the product destination market X. The relevant issue of evaluating refinery bottlenecks is the ease with the refineries getting to the exit of the market, but there was an ease entry of the refinery business. The refinery at B, as an example, could not have the market either the downstream or upstream. Product pipeline beta would determine the downstream price of the product if the origin market price extend the crude market of the upstream with the price of the crude of the regulation pipeline. Thus, be warranted entry of the refining is not either. However, the refining exhibited economic on a scale they're not mobile, subject to the environmental startup, and may have the access capacity of thus refinery example that may be the exercise of the monopoly even if the refined product pipeline is perfectly regulated. Even the reported department assumes that all of the market power, if any of the vertical supply chain, is held by a level with the greatest concentration the refineries possess. Greater concentration pipeline concentration is assumed to be non-competitive. Effectively, according to if more of the refineries are involved in not less concentrated associated product origin market with the department with the designate with the product origin market with the non-high risk with the product pipeline with the market for the more the refinery bottom line is less concentrated with the product pipeline or with the connection with the refinery separate product with the destination market with the department designate with the product with the destination market with the non-high risk with the product pipeline with the corridor maybe same token over the department tree with the refinery bottlenecks in the same similar way with the crude pipeline and any other arrangement over the obviated for the continued regulation, particularly with the crude pipeline bilateral exchange, oil companies with the produce the crude and oil runs refineries, any of the second confirmed control pipeline itself may control may control pipeline in any other area. Secondary firm produces oil or runs a refinery. Each firm of those possesses the means to retaliate, respond with the extra of the market power over the other. With each company have the incentive to negotiate with the effect of the pipeline rates of the swap crew, with the execute of the business equivalent of hostage exchange in order to reach an agreement with the maintained pipeline rates for the efficient level. The crude production, crude refining, or activities that have a larger activities that tend to have a large investment, few participants, those in the product marketing. Those are more likely to affect the choice of the vertical integration over the bilateral exchange of the contravailing market power with the presence of the crude awards of the crude destination with the general with the effect of either lessen the need to render them ineffective with the continued federal regulation existing crude pipelines. In most cases, if those factors eliminate welfare loss. For example, the crude of the pipeline competes compared to the crude destination with the potential market power with the crude origin of the vertical with the integration price discrimination may prevent with the welfare reducing production loss of the marginal fields. And in the other case, such refinery bottlenecks market power may still be present, but pipeline regulation can have no beneficial effect. 4. Choosing the proper unit over the regulation. Pipelines over the not market should be deregulated on the basis of the price line. Based on the principle of Chapter 3, with the Department to classify with all the pipelines according to the price for the deregulation and compared with the competitive with the one market deregulation probably would be harmful with the designated with the high-risk market to all of the other designated with the non-high-risk markets. All pipelines operate at least with the two markets, one origin market with one destination market. The additional most over the operator with the most over the multiple origin of the destination market over the both, therefore with the possible the number of pipelines operating with the high-risk market and the non-high-risk market with the more suitable with the first flush with the regulate over the high-risk market with the deregulate over the non-high-risk market. With it, however, the practical policy, most costs by serving one market cannot easily be separated with a serving of the potential of the deregulation rate with a default and difficult cost allocation problem. The more eventually partial with the regulation of the pipeline likely to impose substantial administrative the allocated cost. In practical matter, therefore, it appears that the pipeline should be either the regulated or deregulated, respective to all of its market, to decide if the particular pipeline should be deregulated. There is necessary to balance of the high risk against the non-high-risk market when the social benefit of preventing extra of the marketing power of the high-risk market with against the regulatory cost of that would be incurred by the pipeline with respect to the non-high-risk market. Outcoming of the balancing temperature should be related with the proportion of the pipeline throughout the trades of the high-risk market. With, for example, in all of the near all bulls of the on-take off-take over the pipeline occur with the non-high-risk origin destination market of the pipeline certainly be deregulated and equally clear that the pipeline operating primarily market for the high-risk over the pipeline should be continued to be regulated of the defining pipelines for the deregulation. Once determined the pipeline not markets over the appropriate for the regulation and the deregulation become necessary to define with the precise for the possible the collection of physical property with the consider the pipeline here historically units of the regulation of the pipeline industry has been the pipeline company only several system of the transfer of the different commodity of the crude oil varies the oil price with the regulator says the rate of the return each of the company as a whole. For example, the Chevron product with the pipeline with the El Paso with the Albuquerque has been combined for certain regulatory purposes with the Chevron crude pipeline with the Rangeley with the Colorado to Salt Lake City. In Williams' case, the department took the position before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission with the pipeline company is too broad to the effect of the regulatory treatment. The Federal Economic Energy Regulatory Commission would agree with that said it would require a separate regulation of the continue with the pipeline system, but if it is not attempted to define that term, to date there has been no apparent change with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission accounting and reporting of the requirements, although it is reversed almost every aspect with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Williams' decision when the court appealed with neither with the overturn with a portion of the decision expressly required with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission problem regulating pipelines on the market basis of the well-noted with the ICC allocated operating costs of the segment to segment market by market basis with the court with itself with the provided no guidance regulating the allocation of the capital cost. Thus, the conclusion the pipeline cannot be regulated effectively on the market basis is not inconsistent with the court's appeal of the decision court with the decision because of the department analysis of the particular markets for the term pipeline refers to contiguous so the physical property of the form of the property unit of the regulation or deregulation theoretical principle to define with the pipeline contingency of the facility with the necessary conditions simply preferable to treat with separately with the two pipelines having one owner but no common facilities. If the one of the pipelines lacks significant market power, it would be efficiently regulated with the power of the larger whole without more over the greater number of the individual pipelines could be defined with a company contingency system is less likely to be any one of the pipelines operating under both a high risk and non-high risk market. On the other hand, in the two segment of the pipeline system share with a common facility facilities. It may not be wise to separate the regulatory purposes of they will necessarily allocating joint costs between them if one segment we regulated or other deregulated with a pipeline company that would have the incentive to allocate with a common facility with a rate base for the regulated common pipe component. To illustrate these principles, consider the pipeline segment as owned with a single pipeline company as illustrated in Figure 1. Crude oil's file flows from the point A, B, C, and D to show the crude oil fields in A, B, and C, D, and E, F, and G. E and I product H markets. Refinery E, the pipeline segment of the A, B with the converge of the C with the product flow with the refinery E, the point F, G, and H with the I with the pipeline segment of G and H with the diverge A, F. Regulatory with the treatment of the network with single unit would not be efficient. For example, the crude pipeline regulated separately with the product pipeline with sends for the crude product for the shipment usually perform in a different facility, but there is no problem with allocating joint costs between them. Likewise, joint construction costs for the criterion probably permits for the product segments for the between E and I with the crude segment of D and E with the treatment of the individual pipeline. Consider the figure of the reveal for the joint cost of the allocation problem. Make sure that the pipeline segments over the EF and EG and FH for the product transport of the EH for the first transported to F of the facility E and B with E and F with maybe U with not only diverse for the F but also for the diverse of H. The pipeline company may post one over the tariffs over the one in F, E and F to the second tariff of the E and H, E to H. If F and H, the regulated E, F and E and F are regulated with the pipeline company would have the incentive to assign with the most of the joint costs from E to F to possible for the delivery if two of the deliveries at F. So would it increase the regulated tariff at F? The shipment to E and F that might be subsidized from shipment between E and H. For the alternative, the F and H remain regulated, while the E and F, the deregulated pipeline company may argue that the most of the cost facilities between E and F may include with the tariffs between E and H. For the shipment between E and H, may subsidize the shipment between E and F. If there were no solution for the joint with the cost allocation problem, then either way, the high-risk destination market against the non-high-risk destination markets over the single with the pipeline would be eliminated. However, the department believed the non-satisfactory solution possibility accordingly. Finds pipeline to split with a pipeline company into the individual physical pipeline component subject with the provision with the two individual pipeline share with a common segment of the two with the data consideration. Order to define with the pipeline separate the regulatory treatment of the following with the data is needed, the location of the segment and endpoint for the direction of the pipeline flow with the commodity with the transport with the crude or product with the segment capacity with the segment length with the segment the diameter for the purpose of defining for the pipeline specific recommendation deregulation with the continue with the regulation department to rely with the data with the Department of Energy pipeline company for the form EIA 184 with the data with the two significant shortcomings of the 6 years old with the second of the various respond with the company to define relevant concept of the differentiating, creating data with the inconsistent, particularly with the spur pipeline with the parallel pipeline figure. Consider with the figure 2 with the diagram with the spur pipeline. Most of the figure 2 show with the A to B and C then D. The respond with the purpose to respond with the three separate segments of between A, B, B, C, and B, D. Colonial have reported that only A and C, Houston and Greensburg, North Carolina, and B and D, Atlanta, Jamaica, and Georgia. Either case, for the B with the line AC with the entire of the ABCD network should be treated as a single pipeline due to the joint cost consideration. Figure 3 show the single pipeline company with a parallel the pipeline ABC and ABD with the EIA 184 report. So it shows A to B and then B to C to D. Companies appropriately discover the situation involved with the three segments A and B and C and B and D average the capacity with a two AB lines determine the capacity of A with the Wolverine. However, the reported three segments A, B, Hamilton, Indiana, the Niles, Michigan with the BC with the Niles, two with the Grand Haven with the Michigan, and the A with the Hamilton, Marshall with the Michigan, but it did not add the capacity with the two Hamilton Niles pipelines with the Evermore Strike from the Colonial reported the parallel trucking lines between the Houston and the Greensburg with the two separate segments, although the capacity of these segments was evidently added together to present the purpose of the definition of the pipeline for the deregulated purposes, and lay with the theoretical principle of the data issue with the discussed over the department over the following term of approaching with the competing over the analysis recommendation of the particular pipelines regulated deregulated segment of the major pipeline segment that reported in the EIA 184 defined with a single report with the origin point with a single report determinant for the end point Direction of flow of the direction from the origin point of the terminus endpoint of the segment is reported the EIA 184 with the commodity transfer of the commodity of the segment that reported the EIA 184 with the June of the 1979 with either crude oil or petroleum product. The capacity of the segment that reported EIA 184 June 1979 link with the segment. Distance and mileage between the origin point with the terminus of the end of the segment that reported the EIA 184 with a measure of the long with the right of the way of the segments and segment point with the origin point with the terminus end point with the segment as reported the EIA 184 subsegments of the portion of the segment that delineates segment points of the another segment owned by the simple same pipeline company but lying owned wholly within the segment. For example, the figure 2, if the AC with the reported in a single segment, it was split with the two segments A and B and C. A, B, and B, C with the segments point B lies on AC with the parallel segments. Two segments are owned in a single pipeline company with the same segment with a point of directional flow of the combined parallel segments of the capacity of the combined into the single segment. For example, figure 3, if the two pipeline segments A and B were reported separately, we will combine segment chain with the continuous segments owned over the same pipeline company transportation, same commodity with the origin point of the segment serving with the terminus on and end point of the adjoining segment of the pipeline company. The largest possible segment chain in terms of capacity within miles was formed first. Once the segment chain was formed, the next largest segment chain was formed out of the remaining segment is a for example, in figure 2 with the segment of BC with it has the greater capacity in miles within B and D than the diagram representing the two segment chain with the A, B, C, and B and D. Pipeline on more of the continuous segment that cannot be directly supplied with the chain cannot be directly supplied with by another segment of chain with the transfer of the same commodity with it owned by the same pipeline company. Figure 1 thus depicts 4 pipelines A, B, C, E, D, E, F, G, H, and EI, while the figures 2 and 3 with each depict one pipeline. 5. The data used in this report, the Department of the Observation of the Origin and Destination Oil Pipeline that derived with the pipeline tariffs on the file with the Federal Energy Reserve Commission. State regulatory agents compile with the publisher the markup of the posted pipeline when the tariffs indicate the location currently operating pipeline terminals data with the pipeline capacity obtained with the number of the source of the primary source of the racing with the June 1979 pipeline throughout the capacity report with the EI 184 with the EIA 184 was submitted with the Department of Energy Pipeline Company with the provide with the basis of the 1980 pipeline study with each of the pipeline companies supplied on its EIA 184 with the capacity with the significant segments. Each of the pipeline individual pipeline company was permitted to decide what it considered the significant segment. The second source of the pipeline capacity with the data in 1978 study with the National Petroleum Council. In this case, the EI 184 did not indicate the pipeline capacity of the data of the National Petroleum Council for the study that used in this report of the EI 184 of the National Petroleum Council for the study that did not include the proprietary lines. For information for the proprietary lines, the department relied on the pipeline map prepared in 1975 by the Office of the Oil and the Federal Energy Administration of the various of the public sources, including oil company and annual reports. All sources of the pipeline data report with the capacity of the defined segment to make a take with the capacity individual pipeline terminals. This is with the defined with the pipeline capacity with the Bureau of Economic Analysis and segment is with the capacity with the enter the destination and leave the origin of Bureau of Economic Analysis. The best of the public data with the pipeline through with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission with the Regulated Pipelines Annual Federal Regulatory Commission Form 6 reports over the file of the Economic Regulatory Commission by various pipeline companies with the pipeline companies report with the total company annual receipts of the crude and refined products of the day with the origin. In many cases, it is possible to input, throughput, or individual segments from the Form 6 data. The waterborne transportation data was used with the 1980 actual shipment of the Bureau of Economic Analysis data that was obtained with the Army with the Corps Engineer with the well complied with the shipment of data with the product with the all internal coastal movements by the water for the focus of the data with the pipeline market power of the department may have included waterborne shipment of data only when the pipeline-able products of gasoline, jet fuel, kerosene, with the diesel fuel, with the distillate heating oil, and the crude petroleum as complied with the Corps Engineering waterborne transportation data with the organized for the port origin port destination with these data assigned with the Bureau of Economic Analysis, which is ported located with the discovered and above the refineries, crude pipeline, product pipelines with a complete against each of the under and circumstances in order to compute the market share of the HHI index and estimate the capacity of the figure of the facilities made comparable to the useful measure of the refinery capacity of the use of this in this report of the crude oil distillation capacity of the capacity measure of it in terms of the crude oil within the comparable to crude pipeline capacity with it is not comparable to the product pipeline capacity within two reasons of their inputs of the refinery other than the crude oil. And such as natural gas plant liquids over some of the olive refinery products over the oil and gas, jet fuel, kerosene, diesel fuel with the distillate heating oil can be transported with either the petroleum product pipelines Recyclable fuel and petroleum coke and asphalt that do not transport with the pipeline liquid petroleum gas with the transport with the liquid petroleum gas pipelines, which are not discussed in this report. In order to make the capacity of the refinery product pipeline comparable to the department to compute with the ratio of the product pipeline products with the crude input with the refined with the 13 bureau of mines refining districts in the 1982 with the result of the ratio of the U with the adjusting refinery incapacity downward to make the comparable to the product pipeline capacity product pipeline and the origin market to compete with the local composition petroleum product. Thus, the local consumption information must include with the product origin of the market in order to calculate shares accurately. So that was the 13 Bureau of Mines refining districts. Since consumption figures the Bureau of Economic Analysis are not readily available, they were derived with available the data with the consumption by the state with available data from the form of the 1980 consumption by the state of the motor gasoline, jet fuel, kerosene, distilled fuel with using the 1980 consensus data with the state with the consumption figures with the converted with it into the per capita consumption, which was multiplied with the Bureau Economic Analysis population with the Bureau Economic Analysis consumption with the Bureau Economic Analysis cross stated borders weighted to per capita consumption with a figure based on the percent of the Bureau Economic Analysis population. Each of the state was used with a multiplier of local crude oil crude productions complete with within the pipelines over the mode of transportation crude destination markers for the tributary include with the market universe for the 18 major producing state of the department obtained with about county to county information for the 1981 crude production from the state officials and that was able to assign local production of the Bureau Economic Analysis of the state of the most remaining 30 state of the continuous United States of the non-significant crude oil producers. However, the Bureau Economic Analysis crude producing states for the which the department currently does not have the county product data with the nearly Arkansas does not have county production nearly notably Arkansas and Ohio with the department estimated Bureau Economic Analysis production based on the total state of the production 1982 vary for the public service of the geological information of the crude production activity within these states. 6. The recommendations of the individual oil pipelines. This chapter analyzes the need with the continue with federal regulation. Individual oil pipelines make a recommendation for the number of oil pipeline analyze recommendation based for the methodology. Chapter 3 with above with the U with the information currently with the Department of Disposal with the should oil pipeline legislation being enacted. The Department anticipates making the final recommendation regarding with the need for the continued federal energy regulation commission and the regulation of the individual pipeline as such for the time within the form of the specified with the legislation based upon the current information. The Department to recommend with the FERC with the regulator with the following product with the pipeline Colonial Wilson with the Chevron and Salt Lake spoken the product with some of the pollution capital in addition. There are 6 product pipelines for the relative of the benefit of the call for the continue with the Federal Energy Regulation Commission regulation are too close to the call with this time of the 2 type of the Badger and the Yellowstone, which are Canada within Texas Eastern. At this time of the department, it does not make any recommendation with respect to any liquid petroleum gas, natural gas, liquid, or anhydrous ammonia pipelines. The department recommends federal deregulation of all the other all other oil pipelines. However, nothing of a discussion of the following anticipated the elimination of the tariff regulation currently exercised by the individual states for each of the 2 group of the product pipeline with the recommended with the Federal Energy Regulation Commission over the recommended with the future step of the table over the adjacent page of the report indicating with each of the pipeline share with a total of 1983 barrels, excluding the Trans-Alaska pipeline system with the tables with the indicate with the pipelines are recommended with the continue with the regulation account with 26% of the 1983 barrels of mills, while pipelines recommended immediate deregulation account for the 70.9% of the 1983 barrels a mile. Pipelines require that the study at 3.1% of the 1983 barrels per mile, with the department recommended that all of the existing crude oil of the pipeline be deregulated. The department has analyzed the crude oil pipeline market with the accordance with the methodology with the contained within Chapter 3 above. The department has identified with the crude pipeline with the present with a clear case with the continue with the federal regulation in addition with the theoretical consideration tend to lessen the need with the continued federal regulation of the crude pipeline, crude production, with the crude refining activity, feature fewer participant, larger investments with the production and product marketing, thus crude origin of the destination market is more likely to exhibit the characteristic either the mitigate with the exercise of the market with the power over the undercut effectiveness of the regulations. Even the pipeline recommended with the continue with the regulation, Colonial Williams and Southern Pacific Chevron product only in Cal no, and that's a total of Federal Economic Regulation Commission Form 6 reports. Recommended future study, Texas, Canada, West Shore, Yellowstone, Badger, Waco, total of 6 reports. Characteristics which include vertical integration, bilateral exchange, bottlenecks elsewhere with the vertical supply chain with a weakened the justification Deregulation, continued federal regulation of the crude oil pipelines. Mainer in the chapter considers individual pipelines beginning with the recommended with the continued regulation with the turning of these gray area with the market with the conditions with the place with the close with the threshold competitive with the concern. Also discuss some of the pipelines over the declared candidates for the deregulation. These lines are selected for the discussion of the preliminary structural screening indicated with a more detailed investigation was warranted. Many with additional pipelines can be safely deregulated or not discussed. Some of the pipelines analysis of the following are with the company with a table of the content. Each of the Bureau of Economic Analysis with a Herfindahl measure of the pipeline through with the capacity of the Bureau of Economic Analysis. Herfindahl measure adjusted with the circle plus capacity in accordance with Chapter 3. The table should be viewed merely as a gross tool of the evaluate market concentrations of the Bureau of Economic Analysis of the main keep the only roughly approximation of the relevant market with the Bureau of Economic Analysis, or not reasonably approximation of the relevant market, nor with the table of the individual pipeline analysis. Pipeline recommended with the continue with the regulation Colonial Pipeline with the use of the New York product. Colonial joint venture with the 10 oil company with it is of the Trump candidate with the continue with the regulation. Historically, 40% of the Colonial shipments are made with the non-owner with the limited the vertical integration justification deregulation. Colonial main truck line can be considered the two segmented each with the confront with a different competitive situation. First segment of Houston to Washington D.C. with the Colonial runs parallel with the plantation line with the air with the main truck with the two pipelines are separated with the Atlantic port with the competition distance of 100 to 250 miles within such with the Atlantic Charlotte with the Dream Pearls Colonial the plantation stand with the Dubly. There's vertically no competition from the refineries on the water transportation while truck line capacity of the Colonial plantation over the southern states easily exceed with the local consumption requirements of the HHI index adjust for the surge capacity of the still with the 5,000 combined with the product consumption of the Bureau of Economic Analysis between the Houston and Washington D.C. Seeking enough to justify by the regulation of the Colonial over the although 11 over the Bureau of Economic Colonial with the plantations over the virtual with the duopoly, and 3 the Southern Bureau of Economic Analysis of the Colonial and the monopolist the local product with the consumption total of the 800 of the MBDs of the consumption compromised significantly 35% of the maximum combined truck line capacity of the Colonial and plantation 2,467 MBDs. The second part of the Colonial North Washington, New York. Colonial no longer company police with a plantation with however the does for the compare with the refineries for all of the water transportation Baltimore local product consumption with 112 of the MBDs and Colonial competes at 31 MBDs in water shipment as well. The HHI adjusts for the surplus capacity of the Baltimore in 5564. Colonial prices of increase for the Baltimore will probably with the unprofitable sin for the water receipt of the particular receipts of the foreign product could expand. With the Baltimore, Colonial appears to face still with the grave of the competition of the region with the Colonial face the competition for the foreign import of the wisdom with the creed for the recent year for the addition with the 960 MBD with the Colonial pipeline competes. Philadelphia with 170 MBD, Sheffield refinery 168 with the MBD with the PB refinery with 150 some of the refineries, and then show the Will pipeline entire network through the Midwest product. Williams has been another candidate. Continued regulation independent Williams system with the fraud of the largest product with the carrier of the United States with the Williams transfer over the product with the Oklahoma with the Kansas for the over the Word V with the truck 2 line for the East line with the West line with the East line with the runs for the Kansas with the V with the Desmond with the Monopoly with the Minneapolis West line with the Kansas City V with the Oklahoma with the Sioux City with the Iowa with the Sioux Falls with the South Dakota with the 2 with the lines joined with the Central Minnesota go to service Fargo with the North Dakota and Grand Forks with the North Dakota and some of the all areas of the William face significant competition with the no market power with the competitive Chicago, the St. Louis market with the markets of the water traffic on the Mississippi, the Illinois River, the office of the William with the competition with the Quincy with the Illinois, and the Peoria, Illinois, at the Mississippi River port with the Davenport with the water shipments with the compromised 1% of the local concept and consumption with the rest of the company with the Acro pipeline with the Fort Madison with the and Williams. Increased water shipment with the Davenport with the potential for the competition, the Amco with the Albuquerque with the 73 mile with the north of Badger with the Peru with the Illinois 75 miles east with the Probable Forest over the Williams Market Power with the Davenport with the Rockford, Illinois, Williams Amco with the Badger with the Tripology. However, the competitive with the Chicago market is only 86 miles away, and with the Springfield with the core of Illinois with the Williams Phillip with the Shelf proprietary line faith the competition of the Marathon Champagne at 47 miles east of the Dakota over the River Port at Pure, 70 miles north of Springfield, as well as the potential for the competition of the Explorer Pipeline was whose right away with the passage of the Springfield the Dakota with the Bureau of Economic Analysis. Williams probably also faced with the adequate competition for the Missouri with the Columbia Ministry with the Williams with the Arco with the Tripology with both the Continental with the Terminal with the Belly with the Ministry over the 75 miles away for the Columbia to the Springfield, Missouri Williams Continent over the CR farmland faced with the potential competition with Explorer with the AMCO with the pipeline with the recently canceled with the tariff for the destination for the BA with the Bureau of Economic Analysis 108, Kansas City with the Air Force supplying pipelines Williams Phillips and the AMCO and the ARCO with the Omaha to Nebraska with the Air Supply with the four pipelines William AMCO with the NCRA with the proprietary line with the Chaplain line recently acquired with the Cana with the well with the William with the race with the competition some of the air with the peer with the head with the market powers now with the well William raises the sheer with the competitive with the current with the most of the eye with the except for the AMCO with the proprietary system with the converters of the shape of the William has no with the competitive with the demo with the coast within 150 miles Williams AMCO with the duopolis with the Dismo with the Bureau Economic and C with the Rapids and with the Dalbure DeBerkey with the Williams as the Monopolis of Waterloo with the Iowa with the Fort Dodge with the Iowa with the William with the Kanab or Duopolis is Williams the Kanab with the AMCO with the Triopology in Sioux City, Iowa and Sioux City Fall with the South of Dakota. Williams has the market power within other Iowa within central Wisconsin. Williams and Coke and six in Junction City Priority Pipeline only supplied with the shore for the Williams and Coach Mayflies. The competition was zoomed with the third shore for the west shore of the pipeline with the Green Bay with the 95 miles east of central Nebraska with the air of the Tripology, Williams, Kanab, and Husky, Chani, and the Fargo with the North Dakota, Moorhead, the Minnesota. Williams, Kanab, Elm Cove with the From and the Tripodel with another. The competition for the more than 200 miles north of Fargo with the Williams is a monopoly for the Grand Forks and south of Fargo. Williams, Kanab area to West Aberdeen, South Dakota. In summary, Williams participates in concentrated product with the destination markets over the wide area of the Iowa and Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, and Wisconsin. Wisconsin should be deregulated. Williams should not be deregulated. So Chevron, Salt Lake Space. Chevron, like Salt Lake Spoke Oak, should not be deregulated with the capacity. These are old. But anyways, we are on page 90 on the